Morning I got fired. Started like every other Tuesday. I woke up at 5:45 in the morning. I made a cup of instant coffee in my small apartment. It was the same apartment I had rented after my divorce. Then I drove 40 minutes through Chicago traffic to the warehouse where I had worked for the last 6 years. By 8:12 that morning, I no longer had a job. Getting fired was not the part that shocked me. What happened the next morning changed everything. My boss, the same man who had looked me in the eyes and told me the company no longer needed me, showed up at my apartment before sunrise. He looked exhausted. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His hands were shaking. He looked at me and quietly said, "Please, Ethan, I need you to come back." At first I thought he was joking. He was not. And before that day was over, I realized losing my job may have saved my life. My name is Ethan Carter. For 6 years, I worked as the operations supervisor at a distribution warehouse outside Chicago. The work was not exciting. Every day, thousands of boxes filled with medical supplies, electronics, and office equipment passed through our building. Most people never thought about where those shipments came from. People like me made sure they arrived on time. I was never the loudest employee. I was never the smartest. But everyone knew one thing. If Ethan promised something would be finished, it always was. I trained new employees. I covered extra shifts. I worked weekends. I missed birthdays. During the busiest months, I barely saw my family. I believed loyalty mattered. Then Monday afternoon arrived. Around 3 o'clock, my manager, Richard Collins, walked across the warehouse floor with two people from Human Resources. Nobody smiled. Richard usually smiled even when he delivered bad news. This time he did not. He stopped in front of me. "Ethan, conference room." That was all he said. I followed them upstairs. The conference room felt colder than usual. A folder was already waiting on the table. The moment I saw it, I knew something was wrong. Richard folded his hands. "Ethan, the company has decided to eliminate your position." For a second I thought I had misunderstood him. "Eliminate my position?" I asked. "Who is replacing me?" He answered too quickly. "No one. The company is restructuring." I looked toward the woman from Human Resources. She avoided my eyes. Richard pushed the folder toward me. Inside was a severance agreement. 2 weeks of pay, 1 month of health insurance, a place for my signature. 6 years of hard work had been reduced to a few pieces of paper. I asked him one last question. "Why?" He sighed. "It is not personal." I laughed quietly. "It is hard not to take it personally." He looked down at the table. "The decision has already been made." I stood up. "So that is it." He nodded. Security was already waiting outside the conference room. Security. As if I was about to steal something. As I walked through the warehouse, everyone already knew. Some people looked away, others quietly shook my hand. One coworker slipped a folded piece of paper into my jacket pocket without saying a word. I did not open it until I was sitting inside my truck. The note contained only 4 words. "You were not the first." I read those words again and again. Not the first. What did that even mean? The drive home felt twice as long as usual. Every traffic light gave me another chance to replay the meeting in my head. Had I missed something? Had someone set me up? Or had I simply become too expensive to keep? That night I could not sleep. Around midnight I started updating my resume. At 2 in the morning I was still searching job listings that paid far less than my old position. Eventually exhaustion took over. I fell asleep on the couch. Then someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. I looked at the clock. 5:38 in the morning. Still dark outside. I walked slowly to the door expecting bad news. When I opened it, I froze. Standing on my porch soaked from the rain was Richard Collins. He looked terrified. He looked over his shoulder before speaking. "Ethan, I made a terrible mistake." I stared at him. "What are you doing here?" His voice cracked. "Please, you have to come back." I folded my arms. "You fired me yesterday. I know. You had security escort me out. I know. Then why are you here?" Richard stayed silent for several seconds. Finally, he looked directly into my eyes. "Because someone died last night." And in that moment, I realized this was no longer about losing my job. I stood there for a few seconds trying to process what Richard had just said. "Someone died?" He nodded slowly. "Can we talk inside?" Every instinct told me to shut the door. Yesterday, this man had ended my career without an explanation. Now he was standing on my porch before sunrise, asking for help. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. Richard walked in, looking over his shoulder before I closed the door. He seemed nervous, almost paranoid. "You want coffee?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't have much time." That sentence immediately made me uneasy. "What happened?" He rubbed his hands together before speaking. "Do you remember Daniel Brooks?" I did. Daniel was one of our inventory coordinators. Quiet guy, 32 years old, always stayed late, always double-checked every shipment. He had been with the company for almost 4 years. He was found dead this morning. I stared at Richard. "What?" "The police believe it was an accident." "But," Richard looked away, "I don't think it was." The room fell silent. Yesterday I was unemployed. Today my former boss was sitting in my apartment telling me a coworker was dead. None of it made sense. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because before Daniel died," Richard hesitated. "He asked for you." That caught me completely off guard. "For me?" "He told me if anything happened to him, I should find Ethan." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it sounded ridiculous. "I barely talked to Daniel." "I know. So why me?" "I don't know." Richard reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small brown envelope. It was in his locker. My name was written across the front in black marker. Ethan. No last name, just Ethan. I looked at Richard. "You opened it?" "No." "You expect me to believe that?" "I wanted to." He paused, but I didn't. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a flash drive. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. Just a plain black USB drive. "What is this?" Richard shook his head. "I have no idea." I walked over to my laptop on the kitchen table. "You sure you want to do this?" Richard asked. "You came here. You might not like what's on it." "I've had worse mornings." I plugged the drive into my computer. One folder appeared. Warehouse records. Inside were dozens of spreadsheets, scanned invoices, shipping logs, and security reports. At first glance, everything looked normal. Then I noticed something strange. Several shipments had identical tracking numbers. That shouldn't happen, ever. I clicked another file. Same thing. Different dates, different destinations. Same tracking number. "What am I looking at?" I asked. Richard leaned closer. "I've never seen those files before." I opened another spreadsheet. Certain rows had been highlighted in yellow. Every highlighted shipment had one thing in common. They all left the warehouse between midnight and 3 in the morning. There was one more file, a simple text document. I opened it. It contained only one sentence. "They're changing the records after the trucks leave." Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. I looked at Richard. He had gone completely pale. "I swear to you," he whispered, "I didn't know about this." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it. Instead, I answered, "Hello?" For several seconds, nothing. Just breathing. Then a man's voice quietly said, "If you open Daniel's files..." My grip tightened around the phone. "You're next." The line went dead. For a moment, neither Richard nor I spoke. Finally, I looked at him. "Did you tell anyone you were coming here?" "No." "Anyone?" "No." Before I could ask another question, tires screeched outside. Both of us instinctively turned toward the window. A black SUV had stopped across the street. Its windows were too dark to see inside. The engine kept running. Nobody got out. Nobody moved. Richard's face drained of color. "They found us." "What do you mean, they?" Instead of answering, he stood up. "We have to leave. I'm calling the police." "No." "Why not?" "Because if Daniel was right..." He swallowed hard. "We don't know who we can trust." I looked back at the SUV. The driver's door slowly opened. A man wearing a dark baseball cap stepped out. He didn't look toward my apartment. He looked directly at me. Then, without saying a word, he raised a small photograph so I could see it through the window. It was a picture of me, taken inside the warehouse, just 3 days earlier. Someone had been watching me long before I was fired. The man across the street held the photograph for only a few seconds. Then he lowered it, got back into the SUV, and drove away. Neither Richard nor I moved. "What just happened?" I asked. Richard stared through the window, his face almost as white as the coffee mug sitting on my counter. "I don't know," he said quietly. I believed he was lying. Maybe not about everything, but about something. I grabbed my car keys. "We're going to the police." Richard stepped in front of the door. "Ethan, listen to me." "No. I've worked for that company for 12 years. So, I've seen things." "What things?" He took a deep breath. "Every few months, someone from corporate would visit after everyone else had gone home." "Corporate?" "They never introduced themselves." "What did they do?" "They went straight to inventory control. They stayed for an hour, sometimes two. The next morning, shipping records would be updated." "Updated?" "Corrected," he said. "That's the word they always used." I remembered the flash drive, the duplicated tracking numbers, the highlighted shipments. Daniel hadn't collected random files. He'd been building evidence. "But why would he trust me?" I asked. Richard shrugged. "Maybe because you never looked the other way." That sentence stayed with me. Over 6 years, I'd reported damaged inventory, payroll mistakes, and missing equipment. It had earned me a reputation for being stubborn. I'd always thought it was annoying. Maybe Daniel had seen it differently. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't an unknown number. It was Tyler, the coworker who had slipped me the note yesterday. "You weren't the first." I answered immediately. "Tyler, Ethan, don't say my name." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Where are you?" "I can't talk long." "What did your note mean?" There was a long pause. Then he said, "You're the fourth supervisor they've fired in 3 years." My heart skipped. "Fourth?" The others all started asking questions. "What happened to them?" "One quit." "What about the other two?" "I don't know." "You don't know, or nobody knows?" Silence. Then Tyler spoke again. "Meet me tonight." "Where?" "Pier 14. "Why there?" "No cameras." The call ended. Richard looked at me. "What did he say?" I told him. He slowly sank into a chair. "I knew about 2 supervisors," he admitted, "not 4. "You never thought that was strange?" "I was afraid to." The honesty surprised me. For the first time since he'd arrived, Richard didn't sound like a manager. He sounded like a man who had spent years convincing himself not to ask dangerous questions. Around noon, we drove back toward the warehouse, not to go inside, just to look. Police tape surrounded the employee parking lot. Several patrol cars were parked outside. News reporters stood behind the barricades. A banner across the bottom of one television camera read, "Warehouse employee dies in apparent workplace accident." Accident. The word didn't sit right anymore. Daniel had died in the warehouse after leaving behind evidence and a flash drive with my name on it. That wasn't a coincidence. As we watched from across the street, a detective walked out, carrying a cardboard evidence box. Something inside caught my attention. A blue coffee mug, Daniel's mug. It had a faded sticker that read, "Trust data, not people." He used to joke about that every morning. I remembered laughing. Now the words felt like a warning. Richard suddenly grabbed my arm. "Look." A man in a gray suit had just exited the building. I recognized him immediately. He wasn't from our warehouse. He was one of the corporate visitors Richard had described. Instead of speaking with police, he quietly walked to a black sedan waiting nearby. The detective nodded at him as he passed. No questions, no interview, nothing. Richard whispered, "Why would the police let him leave?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. Or maybe I didn't want to think about the answer. That evening I arrived at Pier 14, 15 minutes early. The sun had already disappeared behind the skyline. Fishing boats rocked gently against the docks. The place was almost empty. At exactly 7 o'clock, Tyler appeared. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept. He kept looking over his shoulder before sitting beside me on a weathered wooden bench. "You came alone?" "Yes. So did I." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he reached into his backpack. "I've been waiting 2 years to give someone this." He handed me a worn notebook. The cover was cracked. The pages were filled with dates, shipment numbers, names, and handwritten notes. Daniel's handwriting. I thought the flash drive was everything, I said. Tyler shook his head. No. This is what scared him. I flipped to the final page. There, written in hurried block letters, was a sentence that made my stomach tighten. If you're reading this, don't trust Richard Collins. He already knows who they're protecting. I froze. Richard, the man sitting in my apartment, the man who had begged me to come back, the man who claimed he wanted to help. I looked up at Tyler. Are you sure this is real? He nodded once. Then his eyes widened. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring past my shoulder. Ethan, what? Don't turn around too fast. I felt every muscle in my body tense. Why? His voice trembled. Because Richard is standing behind you. And he's not alone. I looked at Richard standing in front of me. The same man who had fired me less than 48 hours earlier. The same man who had acted like my 6 years of dedication meant nothing. Now he was standing in my apartment asking for my help. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted to know the truth. Who was Daniel really working for? And why had he left my name behind? Richard and I drove back toward the warehouse. Neither of us spoke much during the entire ride. The silence felt heavier than any conversation. When we arrived near the building, we did not park in front. Richard told me not to. Instead, we stopped across the street where we could see the entrance. The warehouse looked exactly the same. The same loading docks, the same trucks, the same employees walking through the doors. But somehow everything felt different, like there was something hidden beneath the normal routine. You see that building every day for years and you think you know it, Richard said quietly. But you don't. I looked at him. What are you saying? He stared through the windshield. I'm saying I should have asked more questions. Before I could respond, my phone started ringing. It was Tyler, the coworker who had given me the note. I answered immediately. Ethan. His voice sounded nervous. Where are you? Near the warehouse. There was a pause. You shouldn't be there. Why? Because someone is watching the place. I looked around. What are you talking about? Ethan listened to me. Daniel was not just checking inventory. What was he doing? He was collecting proof. Proof of what? Tyler took a deep breath. The company has been moving shipments that don't exist. I frowned. What does that mean? It means paperwork says one thing, but the trucks are carrying something else. My stomach tightened. How long did he know? Almost a year. A year. Daniel had been investigating this for a year, alone. Why didn't he tell anyone? Tyler became quiet. Then he answered. Because he didn't know who was involved. I looked at Richard. He was listening carefully. Tyler. I lowered my voice. Did Daniel trust Richard? Another pause. Then Tyler said something that made me uncomfortable. He trusted him at first. At first. What happened? I don't know. The call suddenly ended. I looked at my phone. No signal. That was strange. The warehouse was in the middle of the city. There should have been no reason for my phone to lose connection. Richard noticed my expression. What happened? The call dropped. He looked toward the building. Then he said something quietly. Someone doesn't want us talking. I looked at him. Are you saying you believe me now? Richard didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the warehouse entrance. A man in a gray suit had just walked outside. The same man we saw yesterday, the corporate visitor. He stood near the entrance talking with the warehouse manager. Then he looked across the street, directly at our car. Richard immediately turned away. Do you know him? I asked. Richard's silence gave me the answer. You do. After a few seconds, he finally spoke. His name is Victor Hayes. Who is he? Corporate security. Security? That's what they call him. But, Richard looked uncomfortable, but he doesn't protect the company. He protects the people inside it. I felt a cold feeling in my chest. What does that mean? Richard looked at me. It means whenever someone gets too close to something they shouldn't know. He stopped. What? They disappear. For the first time since this started, I saw real fear in Richard's eyes. Not guilt, not stress. Fear. That night, we went back to my apartment. Richard opened the flash drive again. This time we searched every file. After several hours, we found something hidden, a deleted folder. Inside was a list of names, employees, managers, supervisors. I recognized some of them. People who had left the company suddenly, people everyone thought had simply moved on, but next to each name was a date, and beside the date was one word: removed. I stared at the screen. Richard. He looked over. What? I pointed at the list. Why is my name here? His face changed. I could see the fear returning. What? My name. At the bottom of the list. There it was. Ethan Carter. Beside my name was a date. Tomorrow. I couldn't breathe. Tomorrow. They had already decided something was going to happen to me. Richard stood up quickly. We need to leave. Where? Anywhere. Before we could move, the lights in my apartment suddenly went out. The room became completely dark. Then we heard something. A sound from the hallway outside. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming closer. Richard whispered, "Don't make a sound." The footsteps stopped outside my door. For several seconds nothing happened. Then someone quietly slid an envelope underneath the door. The footsteps moved away. I waited until the hallway was silent. Then I picked up the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. 5 words were written on it. You should have stayed fired. And at that moment I understood something terrifying. My firing was never meant to punish me. I stared at the message in my hands. You should have stayed fired. Those 5 words felt heavier than anything else I had discovered. Because they confirmed one thing. Someone knew exactly what I was doing. Someone was watching me. Richard looked at the paper and slowly sat down. For the first time since this nightmare started, he looked defeated. I should have protected you. I looked at him. What does that mean? He stayed silent. Richard. He rubbed his face. There is something I never told you. I waited. 3 years ago, Daniel came to me. I looked at the flash drive sitting on the table. What did he tell you? He told me he found problems with the shipping records. And I told him to stop investigating. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You knew? I suspected something was wrong. Then why did you do nothing? Richard looked down. Because I was scared. The honesty surprised me. This was not the confident manager who had fired me. This was a man who had been carrying a secret for years. What happened after Daniel talked to you? He disappeared for a week. Disappeared? He stopped answering calls. Nobody knew where he was. And then he came back. Richard looked at the floor, but he was different. How? He stopped asking questions. I looked at the notebook Tyler gave me. Until now. Richard nodded. Until he realized someone else needed to know. I walked toward the window. The street outside looked normal. Cars passing. People walking. Neighbors living their ordinary lives. But I knew something was happening beneath the surface. Something nobody wanted exposed. My phone suddenly vibrated. Unknown number. Again. I looked at Richard. Should I answer? He didn't say anything. I pressed the button. A voice spoke immediately. Ethan Carter? I froze. The person knew my full name. Who is this? You need to stop looking into Daniel Brooks. My grip tightened around the phone. What did you do to him? Silence. Then the voice answered. Daniel made the mistake of thinking the truth would protect him. My heart started racing. Who are you? Another pause. Then the person said something that changed everything. Ask Richard what happened on March 17th. The call ended. I slowly lowered my phone. I looked at Richard. His expression had changed. He knew that date. What happened on March 17th? He didn't answer. Richard. Finally he spoke. That was the day I signed the first shipment report. What shipment report? The one that started all of this. I waited. I was told it was a routine transfer. But the numbers didn't match. I stepped closer. What numbers? The inventory numbers. And you signed it anyway? Richard looked ashamed. I was under pressure. From who? He looked at me. Victor Hayes. The name hung in the air. So Victor was involved from the beginning. Richard nodded. But he's not the person in charge. My stomach tightened. Then who is? Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the table and opened the notebook again. He flipped through several pages. Then he stopped. There. He pointed to a name written near the bottom of one page. I leaned closer. The handwriting was Daniel's. The name was followed by a note. The person who controls everything. I read the name, and I felt like the room became smaller, because it was someone I knew, someone I had trusted, someone who had been working beside us the entire time. I looked at Richard. How is this possible? He shook his head. I don't know. Before I could ask another question, my laptop made a sound. A notification. Someone had accessed the flash drive remotely. Richard looked at the screen. That's impossible. What? That drive isn't connected to the internet. We both stared at the screen. A new file appeared. A video file, created just seconds ago. Neither of us touched the computer. Slowly I moved the mouse. The file name was simple. For Ethan. I clicked it. The screen went black. Then Daniel appeared. He was sitting somewhere dark. His face looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. Ethan. His voice was shaking. If you are watching this, then something happened to me. I looked at Richard. Neither of us moved. Daniel continued. I need you to understand something. A long pause. The reason I chose you was not because you were the strongest person at the company. The video glitched. It was because you were the only person who still believed doing the right thing mattered. I felt my chest tighten. Daniel looked directly into the camera. Do not trust anyone who tells you they are trying to protect you. The video froze. Then one final sentence appeared on the screen. The person who fired you is the person who saved you. The screen went dark. Richard and I looked at each other. Neither of us knew what to say, because suddenly the biggest question had changed. It was no longer about who wanted me gone. It was about why Richard had fired me in the first place.